Thank you very much to Ben's for a terrific set of images, and it justifies you all in coming here instead of watching Boris versus Jeremy tonight. And a wonderful worldview. But what I want to do is to come down to our city, London, and our profession, and instead of looking as visionary like Bent's did 100 or more years into the future, I'm just looking at the next 5 or 10 years, and very particularly at our profession, and what we, not the question of what humanity can and should do, but the question of what the landscape profession can and should do. And so to begin with the history of that, I've got some diagrams by Patrick Abercrombie, who was, I put a ILA symbol in the corner there, he's often described as an architect, which he was, but nobody knows his architecture. He was also a planner, but his planning wasn't a great success. He was on the council of the Institute of Landscape Architects, and his landscape work was much more significant than his architectural planning. He gave us, which is not unfortunately the subject tonight, he gave us the green grid, the green infrastructure plan for London. And he also launched, I don't know of anybody who did it before him, he launched the debate, which Bent's has been taking forward, of urban morphology. Urban shape is the best way to describe it. And so he's got these diagrams of a typical English town with a cathedral, a church in the centre, and then a garden city, which architects were a bit iffy about at the time, and then a continental city, much more compact, and he's been a bit unkind about the cathedral, actually, here, which often soars above. And the reason for the compactness, of course, is defence, that they were walled cities when Britain was protected by its wooden walls, ships, and its oceans. And then New York, which is Bent's is supporting him on. But what Abercrombie himself favoured was Corbusier's view of tall buildings freeing up the ground for green space. It was really a landscape concept, but it failed. Next drawing, please. There's Abercrombie's diagrams again, and one of his assistants on working on the County of London plan and the Greater London plan was Peter Shepherd, who did this drawing and who was the most wonderful draftsman, almost in the same league as Edward. And he did this drawing, he did all the drawings in the County of London plan at the age of 30. And so it's an interpretation of this diagram, but it's much more humanised than Corbusier's. He became a president of the ILA in due course, but it illustrates his principle that buildings should be arranged to define and contain open space. Next one, please.
Problem now is the completely uncontrolled development of modern buildings where they are not appropriate. There are plenty of places that they are appropriate. You can see behind me, dotted around, point blocks, put up wherever a developer wanted it and a local authority allowed it. If I was Mayor of London, I'd simply stop that. I'd cluster the buildings, but I'd make sure that every new building that went up respected a street. London used to be a city of streets, it's become a city of blocks.
I intended to introduce Simon Jenkins before he spoke, but what I wanted him to do was to give him an opportunity to speak for London. And I think he represents very well the majority opinion in the city, rightly or wrongly, that it's better if high buildings are clustered, and it's a mistake if you pepper pot them, spatter them through the city, and that the way in which they meet the street is of crucial importance. I absolutely agree with all those points. What I want to do is read to you some edited text from Simon Jenkins, written over 10 years, commenting on, expanding on the point in his video. And the two projects that he talks about, I've got videos of both, are the Shard and then South Bank Place, which is around the Shell Centre, just opposite Westminster. So here are his comments. The Shard conforms to no planning policy. It marks no architectural focus or rond-point. It stands apart from the city cluster and pays no heed to its surrounding context in scale, materials, or ground presence. Each decision seemed to have been taken without concern for grouping or landscape significance. As if this were some neighbourhood garden shed, this is not a case of planning ignoring the visual quality of the capital. It is not planning at all. The problem is, talking towers with London architects is like talking disarmament with the National Rifle Association. In most great world cities, there is someone in an office somewhere, such as a planner employed by the mayor, who has a vision for the city skyline and that he can share with the world. Our planners can regulate the minute details of front doors or wall colours with, we assume, some urban aesthetic in mind. They regulate the foreground but let the background go to hell. I think he's absolutely right about architects for understandable reasons. The treatment of grouping high buildings and consequently of skylines, it's outside architectural theory. It's outside architectural education. And even more, it's outside the professional interests of architects because they work for single clients. Now he thinks that planners could do the job instead, Simon Jenkins does. And perhaps in some countries they could. I mean, Italy, in southern Europe, generally, the planning profession study architecture before they go into planning. I think some 80% of Europe's town planners work in the UK. I was once one of them. And the consequence of this is that they're trained in social and economic considerations, but not in visual or design considerations. But they are concerned with public goods, with the public welfare, rather than the private clients that architects must properly focus on. So, is there a profession that has the visual skills and has the focus on public goods? My answer to that is obviously yes. Get on the next image, please. The first book to...
It's a video, yeah?
No, it's not.
Oh, hang on, where's... No, you've done
yes, that's it. Yeah, that's
okay.
It. Thank you. The first book to use the title, the phrase landscape architecture in its title was published by Gilbert Lang Meeson in 1828, which is some 50 years before Olmsted's use of the term. And he quoted John McCulloch in the book. That's the title of the book. It was The Landscape Architecture of the Great Painters of Italy, but never mind that. And I'm going to quote next from a letter from John McCulloch, who was a geologist, to Walter Scott, who was a poet. Please excuse my attempting a Scots accent. It really is very hard upon poor Scotland that its money should be thus spent in blotting and deforming its land with such monstrosities. The public at large has a claim over the architecture of a country. It is common property inasmuch as it involves the national taste and character, and no man has a right to pass himself and his own barbarous inventions as a national taste, and to hand down to posterity his own ignorance and disgrace. Do, my dear Scott, put yourself in a passion for once, like Archilochus, and write some iambics against these people. So he's arguing for the focus which our profession indubitably has on public goods. And I go on to argue the next video, please. Go on to, don't press the button until I'm ready though. So I argue that skylines are public goods. High buildings, the morphology of cities is a public good. And as to whether our profession can deal with it, here's Hal Moggridge, ready now, explaining it.
So secluded areas in parkland are of immense importance. And we actually did the same as Tom and put this forward to the GLC, no, Greater London Authority it is now, that they should do something like this and look at the city of London, or London as a whole, and think about the heights of buildings and draw a contour plan of the bottom of the open sky for the whole of London. This actual diagram, the first effort, is not accurate. It shouldn't be taken too seriously. The lines are too low. And in fact, when we worked in Edinburgh, it needs to be more fragmented than that. But I think this concept is something that we as an institute should promote, that the open sky across the whole of London should be designed properly. Thank you.
I think Hal's point is absolutely excellent. And I think the proposal for using a contour plan to represent the morphology of cities, it's something we're all very familiar with, and it's something that Hal needs. He mentioned my own proposal, and if Bence could move on to the next one. This is what he was talking about, yes, which was done about 8 or 9 years ago. But London could and should have an even better roofscape. It is already the world's financial capital. It could become the world's roof garden capital. The English love gardens and love views. So the area between St. Paul's and the Thames, which is protected from high buildings, could become a sky garden. People pay £25 a time to go up the Shard and foot large bills for dining in the city's high-rise restaurants. It gives you an idea of what a contour plan for the city could be like. And I love Hal's description of our concern in these issues of being the space between the roofs and the sky. No, here's number 9, yes. That video was done 20 years after this diagram, which I included in a book, showing the cross-section that cities might come to have. Predominantly green, with historic buildings not greened, and both public space at roof level and private garden space at roof level. And so to show how that fits in to Abercrombie's sequence of diagrams, I've added an extra one at the bottom here. And if we go to the next, I think we're finished with video, so it's just the next slide. Yeah. This is another diagram from the same book, which tried to make fun of the postmodern approach to city skylines that architects were then adopting. And it was intended as a caricature to poke fun of them. But if you look at the city skyline that's developed between 1996 and 2019, the title of the book was A Postmodern View of Design and Planning. And I amused myself that the architects thought, well, what's the latest thing? We've done postmodern, it must be postmodern. And so they've taken my diagram and built it. And then just 2 days ago, I found this on a van in Catford, showing the London skyline being removed. So, to conclude, I believe that cities need the kind of policy that Hal proposed, and whether it's at the height London is now or the giddy heights that Bence is talking about, the buildings need to be coordinated to create public goods and to compose and to deal with surface water and biodiversity and recreational space at rooftop level. There are lots of different public goods, and it needs a plan, and you are the people to do it. Now, believing this, when we had a meeting of which Hal spoke in, I think, 2013, the suggestion was made of producing a Landscape Institute policy statement on high buildings, greening city roofs, and sky space would be my term for it. And Robert and I produced this document, and we sent it to the Landscape Institute, and their response was that it really needed to be put in a context of a world view of the sky space problem. And so we rolled up our sleeves and did another document putting forward a broader policy. I've got illustrations of the two reports there. They were both produced and sent to the Institute, but they weren't ever published. And I think the reason for that was a concern that as a charity, the Institute wasn't in a position to produce policy statements. They were willing to do position statements, but not policy statements. And I'm happy to say that Robert has agreed to address this issue in what he's going to say. So, thank you.